Hello, and welcome to episode 127 of the REconomy Podcast, where we discuss economic issues that impact real estate, housing, and affordability. I'm Odeta Kushi, Deputy Chief Economist at First American, and here with me is Xander Snyder, Senior Commercial Economist at First American. Hey, Xander.
Hey, Odeta, how's it going?
It's great to have you here today because today we're diving into a topic that's been front of mind for commercial real estate since interest rates started rising in 2022. And that topic is distress. Dun, dun, dun. As rates increased, all commercial real estate debt became more expensive to refinance, and floating rate debt immediately became pricier to service. Property prices dropped too, as buyers could no longer afford what they once could when rates were low.
Right. And maybe the best place to start with today's episode is the asset class that most people are associating with distress right now, which is office. And in August 2025, so this year, delinquency rates on commercial mortgage-backed securities, or CMBS, for office properties hit an all-time high of 11.6%, surpassing even the post-global financial crisis levels.
For those that aren't familiar off the cuff with CMBS, they are commercial mortgages bundled into securities, sort of like real estate bonds. They account for roughly 15% of all outstanding CRE debt and are often tied to large properties or portfolios of properties. Xander, I have to say at first glance, an all-time high in office delinquency rates doesn't sound so promising. I thought we were going to be discussing peak distress. Doesn't that suggest things are getting better?
Yeah, fair enough, but distress does have to increase quite a bit in order for it to peak, right? Some good news came in the September release of delinquency rates, and office delinquency rates declined by 50 basis points in September compared to August, so down to about 11%. So still elevated, but after hovering at between 10 to 11% for the last year or so, that stability is suggesting that the worst may be behind us.
So some stabilization, that is encouraging. But since CMBS make up a smaller slice of total CRE loans, do they really reflect what's happening across the broader market?
Generally, yes, with a few exceptions. Trends in CMBS usually become apparent first because they're traded securities and have more frequent reporting. So while they may not capture every nuance of the broader commercial real estate debt market, they're at least a good early indicator of where broader distress could end up.
That's a really good point. So delinquency rates for office CMBS are near an all-time high, and recent data shows it has declined a bit. But that's just 1 month's data. What about that suggests that we are at or near peak distress overall?
Right. Well, flatlining delinquency rates is one part of it. But what's also changed is that prices have fallen far enough that purchase demand is being attracted back into the market. So imagine you have a bathtub.
Oh, yes. Yes. The infamous Economist bathtub analogy. We can never escape it. What does the flowing water represent in this case?
Well, in this case, the water flowing into the bathtub is new distress. So, for example, a property owner that has only recently become unable to service their debt or only recently entered default. The level of the water in the tub is the existing level of distress in the market. And the water draining out of the tub is commercial real estate sales activity.
So in this case, if you have a lot more distress caused, for example, by higher interest rates, then more water is coming into the tub. If there is very little sales activity, that means the bathtub is essentially clogged, right? Very little water is actually draining out.
Exactly. And as a result of the water level, which is the total level of distress, has risen. But more recently, that drain appears to be opening up. And as sales pick up and prices fall far enough to attract buyers, more distress gets drained out of the tub. So even though some new distress will keep flowing in through the faucet, the total level isn't likely to rise much further than where it is now.
So it's not that distress is disappearing, but that the system's finding balance again. That recovery in CRE transaction activity has been relatively modest though, right?
So far, yes, that's right. In the second quarter of 2025, transaction volume for all types of commercial properties increased by approximately $8 billion, which works out to 8.5% compared to the first quarter. And compared to 1 year ago, transaction volume in the second quarter was about $6 billion or 6.3% higher. So increasing, but modestly so.
Okay, so we're not out of the woods yet, but prices have fallen enough to where a greater number of distressed deals look appealing. The result has been a quarter over quarter decrease in the total balance of outstanding CRE debt, the first time in a while.
Yes, and what's more, distressed sales as a percent of all transactions have been rising modestly, even though they're still well below the post-global financial crisis level. So that's another encouraging sign.
Okay, but how are delinquency rates looking in other asset classes?
Well, let's take a look at multifamily next. Delinquency rates for what's called private label CMBS, which just excludes agency loans, have been rising since early 2024 and hit 6.6% in September.
Okay, but why bother breaking out agency loans?
Well, agency loans are insured by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, so they have stricter underwriting requirements. And as a result, agency CMBS have lower delinquency rates. If those agency loans are included, then multifamily delinquency rates are much lower, just a little under 2%.
That higher delinquency rate for multifamily is somewhat surprising since multifamily's fundamentals differ pretty meaningfully from office, I would say. We still have a housing shortage after all.
That's true, but financing challenges over the last several years are beginning to hit hard. Many investors took out floating rate bridge loans when interest rates were very low, expecting to refinance later. Those loans are now much more expensive, and interest rate caps, which usually only last about 3 years or so, are expiring. So some projects that haven't finished or have underperformed are essentially leaving those borrowers stuck.
And how is this trend showing up in the data?
Well, this trend can be observed in the data from a submarket of the commercial securitized debt world called collateralized loan obligations, or CLOs. CLOs, unlike most CMBS, are typically floating rate. So if you look at delinquency rates for floating rate CLOs that were originated between 2020 to 2022, when interest rates were very low, those delinquency rates are much higher than other securitized debt with fixed rates, essentially ranging from between 11 to 14%, far higher than what you see in fixed rate CMBS from those same years.
If only we had DeLoreans that could transport us back to the halcyon low interest rate days of 2021 and take out a fixed mortgage.
Boom, 1980s reference.
See, you hear that, Mark? I know you're listening to the episode. You've influenced me to the point of making 80s references on my own.
Yeah, he's done it. But yes, low interest rates were nice in 2021, but the downside of that year, of course, was the Delta variant.
Yes, you can't forget that. That was tough times. And you know what? I'm usually Debbie Downturn, but it looks like today you might have taken my place. Now, if we turn to the fundamental side of multifamily, a wave of new apartment supply is currently hitting the market, pushing rents down or at least slowing growth in a number of cities. While location-specific oversupply is likely a near-term phenomenon, given that building permits and multifamily construction starts have continued to fall, that 1-2 punch of softer rent growth and higher interest expense is squeezing cash flows and pushing some owners into delinquency, especially those who bought at peak prices with floating rate debt.
Exactly. Multifamily delinquencies may keep rising for a bit longer since many of the investments made in 2021 to 2022 are only now beginning to really struggle or fail. But we're still probably not far from their peak either.
Okay, so we've covered office and we've covered multifamily. What about the retail sector?
Well, retail is really sort of a different story. Retail delinquency rates are still hanging out at around 6.5%, and they've been elevated for the last several years due to reasons that existed before COVID, such as the rise of e-commerce and the death of mall culture.
The so-called retail apocalypse, right?
Exactly, the retail apocalypse. That high delinquency rate is due primarily to weaker malls with higher vacancy rates. But one consequence of retail being such an out-of-favor asset class in the last commercial real estate cycle is that very little new retail space has been built over the last 15 years. So other types of retail, though, like grocery-anchored centers or experiential tenants, which are locations where you actually need to physically visit the store to receive the good or product, they're doing much better. And that's why the retail delinquency rate has started to decline gradually, those better positioned retail locations.
Okay, so some recovery there too. Now, we discussed this a bit at the top of the episode, but how representative is CMBS distress in the broader CRE debt market?
So you can look at delinquency rates for loans held by banks, and they've been rising as well, but they remain much lower than CMBS delinquency rates, around 1.3%. So smaller banks with heavy commercial real estate exposure have often used this amend and extend technique, or it's sometimes somewhat pejoratively called amend and pretend or extend and pretend. And they've done that to delay recognizing losses on their loans. But extending loans isn't always bad. If a property has solid long-term prospects, then an extension can buy it time for a recovery. Some research does suggest that banks with larger balance sheet exposures to commercial real estate loans have been more prone to extending loans in order to delay taking impairments on them.
So, to put this all together, flattening delinquency rates in office and retail, rising but likely near peak multifamily distress, and modest bank exposure all hint we may be close to peak distress.
Yeah, I'd say we're near or very close to the top, depending on the asset class. That doesn't mean that new distress won't continue to appear over the course of the next 2 years. There's still a big wave of commercial real estate debt maturities in the remainder of this year and into 2026, and that will create new challenges. But as sales pick up, as that drain opens up, the market's ability to absorb that distress will improve.
Not out of the woods yet, but getting better, and another bathtub analogy in the books. I will take it. Thank you for joining us today, Xander. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of the REconomy Podcast. If you have an economics related question you'd like us to feature in the future, you can email us at economics@firstam.com. And as always, if you can't wait for the next episode, you can follow us on X. It's at Odeta Kushi for me and at Xander Snyder X for Xander. Until next time.